When you think of the Netherlands, what comes to mind? Peaceful canals, bicycles gliding through cobblestone streets, fields of tulips stretching endlessly under soft gray skies. It looks like a postcard from paradise. But behind that calm, beautiful surface, something extraordinary and controversial is happening. This small European nation has quietly redefined the boundaries of morality itself. Here, what most of the world calls sins are daily, legal, and openly celebrated. Drugs, you can buy them in a cafe. Prostitution? It's taxed, protected, and proudly displayed behind glowing red glass. Euthanasia, the right to die, legalized over 20 years ago. And in recent years, debates have even begun about allowing terminally ill children to choose death. To outsiders, it sounds like chaos. Yet somehow, this sinful society ranks among the happiest, safest, and most peaceful in the world. Crime rates are so low that some prisons have literally shut down and turned into museums or hotels. It makes you wonder, how can a country that legalizes vice still remain so virtuous? What if I told you the Netherlands isn't the most sinful country on earth, but perhaps the most honest one? Because while most nations hide their darkness in the shadows, the Dutch bring it into the light. They believe that pretending sin doesn't exist only makes it stronger. So they confront it, legalize it, regulate it, and study it like scientists dissecting human nature. But there's a cost to this kind of freedom, one the rest of the world rarely sees. Behind the statistics of happiness and progress, there's another story. A story of loneliness, of meaning lost in the name of modern morality, a quiet identity crisis hidden beneath the glow of neon lights and coffee shop smoke. The Netherlands forces the world to ask a terrifying question. What happens when a society removes the boundaries of right and wrong? When everything that was once taboo becomes ordinary? Does freedom reach its peak? Or does humanity begin to fall apart? This is not just another travel story. It's an exploration into how far a nation can go when it dares to challenge every moral rule we thought was unbreakable. A journey into the heart of a modern paradise that some believe may also be a moral laboratory, testing the limits of human conscience. Welcome to the Netherlands, a place where freedom has no walls, where sin is not punished but priced, and where morality has become a matter of personal choice. But as you'll soon see, even paradise casts a long, dark shadow, because when you strip away the fear of sin, you might also strip away what it means to be human. Next, we begin in the city that never sleeps, but not for the reasons you think. Heart of Amsterdam, there's a neighborhood that glows red every night. But these lights aren't from signs or clubs. They're from windows. Behind those windows, women stand silently, waiting. Some wave, some smile, some look away. This is the red light district, the most famous legal sex zone in the world. Here, what many call sin is business. Prostitution, once a hidden trade in dark alleys, is now regulated, taxed, and advertised openly. Each worker rents a small, glass room protected by law, monitored by cameras, and supported by healthcare. They have medical checkups, police protection, and the same labor rights as any other job. It's clean, organized, and shockingly normal. Tourists flood in by the millions. Some come out of curiosity, others come for what's behind the glass. But few realize that this place isn't just about sex. It's about an idea that human desire shouldn't be controlled, but managed. The Dutch government calls it pragmatism. If something can't be stopped, they say, it should be made safe. And by doing so, they claim to have reduced trafficking and disease. But critics tell a different story. They say the red light district has turned intimacy into an industry. That by putting a price tag on desire, society has stripped relationships of meaning. For many locals, It's not a place of empowerment. It's a symbol of emptiness. Residents complain about noise, drugs, and the endless flood of bachelor parties. Families avoid the streets after dark. And some of the workers, though legal, still fall into the hands of hidden exploitation rings that thrive behind legality's mask. One Dutch sociologist described it as a moral illusion, a system that looks free but feels hollow. Because when everything is allowed, what's left to long for? When desire becomes commerce, what happens to love? Even within the Netherlands, people debate whether legalization brought safety or simply normalized something humanity was never meant to sell. For the women behind those red lights, it's not always liberation. Sometimes it's survival, dressed as freedom. The red light district is more than a destination. It's a mirror, reflecting a world that dares to turn taboo into trade. And as night falls over Amsterdam, one can't help but wonder, if this is progress, why does it still feel so haunting? Because the truth is, Amsterdam never truly sleeps. And what keeps it awake isn't noise or nightlife. It's the uneasy silence of a society learning to live without limits. Next, we step into another kind of freedom, one you can inhale. The Dutch experiment that turned drug use into government policy. In most parts of the world, drugs are symbols of chaos, a war fought in shadows, with prisons overflowing and lives destroyed. But in the Netherlands, that war ended decades ago. Instead of criminalizing drug use, they legalized parts of it and built a social experiment the world still struggles to understand. Walk through Amsterdam on a quiet afternoon, and you'll smell it. The sweet, earthy scent of marijuana drifting from small cafes called coffee shops. Here, you can legally buy and smoke cannabis, not behind closed doors, but right under government supervision. Each sale is registered, each gram is weighed, and behind the counter, there's no fear of arrest. The policy is known as gedoogbeleid, a Dutch word that roughly means tolerated but controlled. The logic is simple. If people will always seek escape, it's safer to regulate it than to criminalize it. The result? Overdose deaths in the Netherlands are among the lowest in Europe. Drug-related violence is rare, and while countries like the US spend billions fighting cartels, the Dutch quietly turned narcotics into just another taxable commodity. But not everyone sees success. Critics say this soft freedom has bred a new kind of dependence, not on drugs themselves, but on escapism. Young people grow up in a culture where marijuana is as casual as coffee. And while the streets may look peaceful, some psychologists warn that the nation is becoming too comfortable with mind-altering comfort, trading confrontation for numbness. Even more alarming, beneath the legal surface, darker forces still thrive. Organized crime networks control the supply chain of cannabis and synthetic drugs. Behind every friendly coffee shop may stand a hidden empire. Illegal production, money laundering, and cross-border trafficking. The Netherlands has even been labeled by Europol as a hub for synthetic drug manufacturing, especially MDMA, better known as ecstasy. Freedom, it seems, has a hidden cost. The government insists the system works, that the benefits outweigh the risks. And statistically, they might be right. But there's something deeper at play here. The Netherlands didn't just legalize a plant, it legalized an idea that people should be trusted to control their own vices. That morality should never interfere with freedom. It's a bold experiment, and so far it hasn't collapsed. But the question lingers. How long can a society walk that thin line between tolerance and temptation before it slips? Because here, the smoke doesn't just fill the air, it clouds the truth. And as one addiction fades, another begins, the addiction to freedom itself. Next, we confront a choice even more controversial. the right to decide not just how to live, but when to die. In 2002, the Netherlands crossed a line few nations dared to approach. It became the first country in the world to legalize euthanasia. To some, it was an act of compassion. To others, the beginning of moral decay. The law allows doctors to assist in ending a patient's life if the suffering is unbearable and recovery is impossible. It sounds humane, even merciful, but over the years, the definition of unbearable suffering has expanded far beyond the physical. There are documented cases where people chose euthanasia not because of disease, but because of depression, loneliness, or a loss of meaning. In one case, a 29-year-old woman suffering from chronic anxiety was legally euthanized. Her doctor claimed her mental pain was untreatable. Supporters call it autonomy, the ultimate freedom to decide one's fate. Critics call it surrender, a society giving up on the will to endure. The Netherlands insists on strict safeguards. 2 doctors must agree, and the process must be voluntary. Yet every year, the number of euthanasia cases quietly rises. Now more than 8,700 deaths annually, nearly 5% of all deaths in the country. The question grows louder. When death becomes a legal service, how long before life itself starts to lose value? Next, the line between compassion and danger blurs even further. When the right to die is offered to children. If legal euthanasia for adults shocked the world, the Netherlands went a step further, extending the debate to children. Under the Groningen Protocol, doctors can, in rare cases, end the life of terminally ill infants who are in unbearable pain. To many, it sounds unthinkable. But to Dutch lawmakers, it's an act of mercy. Supporters argue that a child suffering from untreatable illness shouldn't be forced to endure pain adults wouldn't tolerate. They say it's compassion, not cruelty, a way to let families choose peace over agony. But critics see something else entirely. A moral cliff that humanity should never approach. Because once you give the power to decide who lives and who dies, where does it stop? The government insists on strict control. Parents, doctors, and ethics boards must all agree. But even so, the very idea, the thought that a society could allow children to die by decision sends shock waves through the rest of the world. Supporters call it the final frontier of empathy. Opponents call it the collapse of moral boundaries. The idea Netherlands stands alone, admired by some, feared by others. Because when mercy becomes policy, the line between compassion and playing God begins to disappear. Next, we look at a quieter revolution, not in law, but in faith, where churches themselves are losing believers. Once upon a time, church bells echoed across every Dutch town. Sundays were sacred. Families gathered. Faith shaped life. But today, most of those bells have fallen silent. In the Netherlands, religion is not just fading, it's vanishing. Over 60% of Dutch people now identify as non-religious. Churches that once guided souls now stand empty, transformed into cafes, apartments, and even nightclubs. The shift began slowly in the 1960s, when post-war prosperity brought confidence in science, education, and independence. People no longer needed religion to explain the world, and so faith quietly slipped out of everyday life. For some, this was liberation, freedom from dogma and guilt. But for others, it left a void. A nation that once prayed for salvation now prays for progress, yet feels spiritually hollow. Sociologists call it the secular paradox. The more people are freed from religion, the more they search for meaning elsewhere. The Netherlands is now one of the most atheistic nations on earth. Its people say they believe in humanity, not heaven. But when there's nothing greater to believe in, what anchors morality? When faith dies, what takes its place? Next, we explore how this loss of belief has reshaped the Dutch family and why marriage itself is disappearing. In the Netherlands, love no longer follows tradition. Marriage, once a lifelong vow, is now just one of many options. Nearly 60% of children are born to unmarried parents, and cohabitation without vows is the new normal. Here, the family is being redefined, not by religion, but by choice. The Dutch see this as progress. Why bind yourself to a promise if love can exist freely? Why depend on paper when trust is enough? To them, commitment is emotional, not contractual, but with freedom comes fragmentation. Sociologists warn that the Dutch household has become one of the most individualistic in the world. People live together, then apart, then alone again, chasing happiness in cycles. Children often grow up between homes, learning independence early, but longing for permanence. The state fills the gaps. Generous benefits for single parents, child allowances, and housing support. It works on paper, but behind the statistics lies a quiet loneliness. A society where connection is temporary and solitude is expected. The Netherlands built a culture where no one needs anyone. Not a spouse, not a family, not even faith. But what happens when freedom becomes isolation? Next. Untold. We look at the rise of another Dutch obsession. Not love or family, but something far more personal. Identity. In the Netherlands, identity is no longer something you're born with. It's something you define. The country that once legalized same-sex marriage before almost anyone else has now become a global leader in gender rights. Here, a person can legally change their gender with a simple form. No surgery, no medical approval, just self-declaration. Supporters call it liberation, the ultimate expression of personal freedom. They say no one should be forced to live within labels they didn't choose. Schools teach children that identity is a spectrum, not a box. Gender-neutral bathrooms are common, and pronouns are respected by law. But not everyone agrees. Some psychologists and parents fear that the line between acceptance and confusion is fading. They ask, if identity is limitless, how does society stay grounded? In recent years, the number of teenagers seeking gender treatment has skyrocketed. Critics argue that social pressure, not self-discovery, may be driving some of these choices. Still, the Dutch stand firm. Every individual deserves the right to define themselves, even if that definition changes tomorrow. For the Netherlands, freedom is sacred. But as boundaries disappear, one question grows. When nothing is absolute, not even identity, what's left to hold on to? Next, we uncover how this same freedom shapes their schools, where children learn about sex, death, and drugs before they reach their teens. In Dutch classrooms, nothing is taboo. Children learn about drugs, relationships, and even death, openly, honestly, and early. Here, education isn't about hiding reality. It's about preparing for it. From age 10, students discuss consent, sexuality, and safe relationships. By 12, they're taught how addiction works, not as a crime, but as a human weakness. Teachers believe that knowledge prevents abuse, and statistics prove them right. The Netherlands has some of the lowest teen pregnancy and STD rates in the world. But this fearless approach has its critics. Some say the cost of awareness is innocence, that children lose their sense of wonder too soon. Others worry it normalizes behavior they're not ready to understand. Yet, the Dutch argue that silence is more dangerous than truth. They believe curiosity doesn't corrupt. Ignorance does. So they raise thinkers, not followers. Kids are taught to question authority, challenge dogma, and make moral choices for themselves. It's an education system built not on obedience, but on understanding. The results are undeniable: confident youth, independent minds, and open hearts. But there's a darker side too. When children grow up knowing everything, what's left to discover? Next, we step into a world where tolerance meets its limits, where the Dutch ideal of openness begins to fracture under the weight of immigration and identity. The Netherlands calls itself the land of tolerance. But even here, tolerance has a breaking point. For decades, this small nation opened its doors to refugees, workers, and dreamers from across the world. From Indonesia to Morocco, Turkey to Syria, immigrants built the modern Dutch economy. Yet today, many of them feel like strangers in the very land they helped shape. Muslim minorities face higher unemployment, housing barriers, and social isolation. Mosques stand beside nightclubs, symbols of coexistence and contradiction. Right-wing parties rise, warning of losing Dutch culture. And the debate grows louder. How open can a society remain before it loses itself? For a country that legalized almost everything, the hardest thing to legalize has been difference. The Dutch pride in freedom clashes with the fear of change. Integration policies encourage inclusion, but resentment lingers beneath the surface. Some immigrants adapt, others retreat into their own enclaves, creating invisible borders in a borderless land. The Netherlands wanted a multicultural paradise, but found a fragile balance instead. Freedom is easy when everyone agrees, but when values collide, tolerance turns into tension. And in that quiet tension lies a haunting truth. The greatest test of freedom isn't how much we allow, but whom we allow it for. Next, we enter the age of soft control, where even in one of the freest countries on earth, privacy may already be an illusion. Freedom. It sounds limitless, but in the Netherlands, even liberty comes with eyes. This country, famous for open laws and open minds, also has one of Europe's most advanced surveillance networks. Street cameras watch silently from every corner. Digital monitoring systems track traffic, behavior, even patterns of online browsing, all in the name of safety. But how much safety is too much? Officials call it preventive freedom, the idea that order protects liberty. But critics call it something darker: soft control. In a society where nothing seems forbidden, control doesn't come through punishment. It comes through quiet observation. Every citizen enjoys freedom, but is constantly reminded that someone is watching. The paradox is striking. The Netherlands decriminalized actions that most nations fear, yet monitors behavior more closely than many authoritarian states. Every click, every camera, every algorithm feeds into a system meant to keep chaos away. But in doing so, it's building invisible fences around its citizens. It's not dictatorship. It's data. And in the modern Dutch world, data is the new morality. It tells what's right, what's risky, what's next. So the question remains, can true freedom survive when even privacy has a price? Next, we peel back another illusion: the green image of the Netherlands that may not be as pure as it seems. The world sees the Netherlands as a climate hero. Wind turbines spinning over flat fields, solar panels covering rooftops, cities designed for bicycles, not cars. It looks like the future. But behind this green curtain, the truth is far more complicated. The Netherlands is one of the biggest exporters of agricultural products on the planet. Tiny in size, but a giant in output. That success comes at a cost. Massive greenhouse emissions from intensive farming, overloaded nitrogen in the soil, and a pollution crisis so severe, the government has proposed shutting down thousands of farms. Corporations use the Dutch green image to sell products worldwide, while emissions rise quietly at home. It's a nation trying to heal the planet, while feeding its own addiction to comfort and profit. Electric cars roll through streets powered by energy still partly from fossil fuels. Windmills may spin, but consumption grows faster than solutions. The Dutch aren't ignorant. They know the numbers. But in a country built on progress, no one wants to slow down. The question isn't whether they're green, but whether they're green enough to survive their own success. Because sometimes, what looks like sustainability is just substitution. Next, the spotlight shifts to a new kind of escape, one that doesn't happen on the streets, but behind glowing screens. Freedom in the Netherlands isn't just physical anymore, it's digital. Here, nearly every home has high-speed internet. People live half their lives online, working, loving, even escaping. Virtual gaming, online dating, and now, AI companions are becoming part of daily life. The same country that legalized nearly every form of pleasure in the real world has now built new ones inside screens. Social media influencers replace priests. Online communities replace neighborhoods. The Dutch call it progress, connection without boundaries. But psychologists are sounding alarms. Behind the glow of digital freedom lies a silent epidemic. More than half of young adults report feeling lonely, despite being constantly connected. Screen addiction is rising, while face-to-face interaction fades. The virtual world has become a safer, cleaner version of reality. No judgment, no risk, no rules. But in trading imperfection for convenience, something human gets lost. The Netherlands pioneered tolerance in the physical world. Now, it's pioneering it in the digital one. But this time, the cost isn't moral, it's emotional. Because when life becomes too easy to simulate, reality starts to feel unnecessary. Next, we uncover how this moral freedom, real and virtual, turned into something unexpected, one of the strongest economies on Earth. For a nation so sinful, the Netherlands is surprisingly rich. Its GDP ranks among the world's highest. Unemployment? One of the lowest in Europe. Even with open drug laws, prostitution zones, and euthanasia debates, the economy thrives. Some call it the moral profit model. By legalizing what others criminalize, the Dutch turned vice into revenue. Coffee shops, red light districts, and liberal tourism pump millions into the treasury every year. What others hide, the Dutch tax. And the system works, at least financially. But can morality and money ever coexist peacefully? For every euro earned from freedom, a deeper question follows. At what cost? Critics say the Dutch have commercialized conscience, that they've replaced guilt with profit. Yet the people see it differently. They argue that regulation brings order, that control is better than chaos. Maybe that's the secret. Not eliminating vice, but mastering it. Where most countries fight what they fear, the Netherlands simply monetized it. And in doing so, it built one of Europe's most efficient, peaceful economies. Still, behind the numbers lies a quiet unease. Because when morality becomes a market, how long before humanity follows? Next, we enter the classrooms of this fearless nation, where children are taught truths most adults elsewhere never dare to discuss. Everything the Netherlands does, from euthanasia to legal drugs, from sex work to secularism, comes back to one belief: autonomy. The idea that every human being should have complete control over their own life, body, and destiny. It's the Dutch way. Trust people to choose for themselves. Here, freedom isn't granted by the state. It's assumed. The government doesn't dictate morality. It manages consequences. That's why so many of the world's controversial laws started here. To the Dutch, freedom isn't dangerous. Suppression is, but absolute freedom comes with invisible chains. When there are no rules, choice itself becomes a burden. People must decide everything. What's right? What's enough? What's too far? It's a heavy price to pay for autonomy. Sociologists call it the freedom paradox, a nation that gave people every right, yet left them yearning for meaning. Because when everything is permitted, nothing feels forbidden. And without limits, even pleasure loses its power. The Netherlands shows the world what happens when morality evolves faster than emotion. It's not chaos. It's not perfection. It's a mirror, reflecting who we are when no one tells us who to be.